Welcome to Book 4 of Level 1, the I Totally Read These in School Club. Great Expectations. Fun retelling of the classic novel by Charles Dickens. Pip's life, twists, turns, and total drama. Part 1. Meet young Pip and the spooky churchyard encounter. Our story kicks off in the early 19th century, around the marshy, foggy areas of Kent, England. We've got Philip Pierup, who everyone calls Pip, a little orphan boy living with his much older sister, Mrs. Joe Gargery, and her kind, big-hearted blacksmith husband, Joe Gargery. Pip's sis is a champion of the raise 'em by hand method, which basically means she whacks Pip with a cane named Tickler whenever she's cranky, which is often. Joe's the total opposite, super sweet, gentle, and protective of Pip. One day, young Pip's hanging at his parents' gravestones in a lonely churchyard when boom, a terrifying escaped convict grabs him by the throat, demanding food and a file to saw off his leg irons. Pip's like, "Holy smokes, I'm about to pee my pants." But the guy looks half dead from hunger and cold, so Pip agrees to help. Next morning, Pip swipes some bread, gravy brandy, accidentally spiked with tar water, yum, and a file from Joe's forge to give to the convict, who scarfs it down and vanishes into the mist. Pip's conscience is going nuts, terrified of being caught. Soon after, the local soldiers show up hunting two escaped convicts. Pip freaks, thinking he'll be nailed for theft, but instead the convict he aided, named Magwitch, though Pip doesn't learn that yet, covers for Pip by saying he stole the items himself. The soldiers recapture Magwitch. Pip's relieved but also haunted by this weird experience, like, why am I helping criminals? He's got no clue this act of kindness is about to shape his entire future. Back home, Mrs. Joe's oblivious to Pip's secret. She continues to brag that she brought him up by hand, while Joe tries to keep peace. Life goes on in the forge, with Pip daydreaming of better things but mostly resigned to a future as Joe's apprentice. In Dickensian England, if you're born poor, you're likely to stay poor, unless fate decides otherwise. Not long after, a mysterious invite comes for Pip. The local wealthy recluse, Miss Havisham, wants him to visit and play at her decaying mansion, Satis House. Miss Havisham is rumored to be half crazy, ever since she was jilted at the altar years ago. She still wears her old wedding gown, roams around a rotting feast table, clock stopped at the exact moment she was abandoned. Creepy much? Pip's sister thinks this is a golden opportunity. Maybe Miss Havisham will fancy Pip and help him rise in the world. Joe's just confused but goes along with it. Pip's anxious and curious. His first trip to Satis House is about to deliver some major weird vibes, and a girl will steal his heart and also break it. Part 2. Miss Havisham, Estella, and Pip's first taste of snobbery. When Pip first steps inside Satis House, the vibe is straight up haunted house meets old Victorian soap opera. Miss Havisham is sitting in a dark room, decked out in her ancient wedding dress and one shoe, her veil and gown yellowed with age. The wedding cake on the table is literally rotting, covered in dust and spiders. She's like, "Come closer, boy. Let me see you." Pip's trembling but also weirdly fascinated. He meets Estella, Miss Havisham's beautiful adopted daughter, who's around Pip's age, maybe a year or two older. She's got major attitude, looks at Pip like he's a mangy stray dog, and calls him coarse and common. Pip's both mortified and mesmerized. Estella's gorgeous, but she humiliates him at every turn, mocking his rough hands, his accent, his peasant vibe. Miss Havisham seems to encourage this. It's like she's training Estella to break men's hearts, feeding off Pip's awkwardness. Over time, Pip keeps visiting Satis House. Miss Havisham has a routine. She'll tell Estella to play cards with Pip or walk around the mansion with him. All the while, Miss Havisham soaks up every bit of Pip's growing infatuation and heartbreak. Pip can't help but daydream that maybe Miss Havisham intends him to marry Estella someday, raising him from lowly blacksmith's apprentice to gentleman status. But Estella shows him zero mercy, calling him an ungrateful boy if he dares show any self-respect. Back at home, Pip's now thoroughly dissatisfied with his life. Joe's goodness seems boring. The forge feels dirty. His future as a blacksmith suddenly feels humiliating. Pip starts longing to be uncommon, so Estella won't sneer at him. He also tries to be kinder to Joe, who remains clueless about why Pip's moody. Meanwhile, Pip's sister is obsessed with these visits, hoping to land a fat check from Miss Havisham. But no windfall is forthcoming. Miss Havisham only occasionally tosses them a bit of money for Pip's services. Eventually, Miss Havisham says, "Okay, kid, you've done enough playing. Time to learn a trade." She gives Joe 25 guineas for Pip's blacksmith apprenticeship. Pip interprets this as, "I guess I'm worthless in her eyes," sulking about it. Estella goes abroad for a while, presumably to study how to be even more of a fancy mean girl. Pip's heart is in pieces, but he can't let her go. He's convinced she's his destiny. So life goes on. Pip officially becomes Joe's apprentice, clumsily working the forge. He's consumed by shame, dreaming of some magical fortune that'll transform him into a gentleman. He has no idea that a certain convict from his past and other hidden players are about to rearrange his fate. Part 3. Apprenticeship woes, tragedy at home, and a mysterious benefactor. So Pip's forging away in the smithy, hating every moment. Joe's sidekick, Orlick, is a sketchy dude who doesn't like Pip much. Tensions escalate, and Mrs. Joe treats Orlick poorly. One day, something horrific happens. Mrs. Joe gets brutally attacked at home. She's found unconscious with a big blow to the head, and no one knows who did it. She survives but becomes an invalid, barely able to speak. Pip feels guilty because he suspects Orlick, but he can't prove anything. Joe's left caring for his wife, who's now docile and reliant on them. Meanwhile, Pip's sulky about his blacksmith life, haunted by thoughts of Estella. Occasionally, he visits Miss Havisham to see if there's any sign Estella's back or if Miss Havisham will drop some cryptic hint about his future. No real luck. Biddy, a sweet girl from Pip's childhood, moves in to help nurse Mrs. Joe. Biddy's kind, sensible, and tries to advise Pip about being grateful. Pip's like, "Meh, I just want Estella." Biddy's pretty sure that's a lost cause, but shrugs. Then, out of nowhere, boom, Mr. Jaggers, a high-powered London lawyer, shows up. This guy's intense, known for winning tough cases. He informs Pip that he's come into a fortune from an anonymous benefactor and must go to London ASAP to become a gentleman. Pip's brain explodes. He's convinced it's Miss Havisham pulling the strings so he can marry Estella. Mr. Jaggers doesn't confirm or deny, just says, "Here's money for new clothes. Pack your bags." So just like that, Pip's great expectations are born. He's on cloud 9, bragging to everyone, including Biddy, who's unimpressed. Joe's proud yet sad to see Pip's ego blow up. The next day, Pip leaves the forge, believing he'll never return to the filthy blacksmith life. He's basically like, "Peace out, losers, I'm off to the big city." He heads to London, imagining a glorious life of clubs, fine dining, and sure, some romance with Estella eventually. The only downer is that Mr. Jaggers specifically says the benefactor's identity is top secret. Pip's not allowed to ask questions. Pip shrugs, thinking, who else but Miss Havisham? He's so giddy about rising in society that he doesn't notice the giant storm clouds gathering in the distance. Part 4. London Life. Pip, Herbert, and the Gentleman Grind. Pip arrives in London and gets a minor reality check. The city is big, dirty, and not as glamorous as he imagined, especially the areas where Jaggers' office is located. Still, he's starstruck by the possibility of buying fancy suits, going to upscale clubs, and hobnobbing with big shots. His assigned mentor in gentlemanly living is Mr. Matthew Pocket, Miss Havisham's cousin. He's a decent teacher, though a bit absent-minded. One cool development is that Pip's got a roommate and new bestie, Herbert Pocket, Matthew Pocket's son. Turns out, Herbert is the same kid Pip once fought at Satis house years ago. They had a random boyish scuffle. Now they laugh about it and become inseparable brothers, calling each other by nicknames and dreaming big dreams. Herbert is a cheerful, kind soul who wants to get into business and marry his sweetheart, Clara, one day. But he's broke, just like Pip used to be. Pip's new lifestyle is expensive, though. He racks up debts left and right. Tailors, bootmakers, restaurants, and his gentleman's club, the Finches of the Grove, which is basically a bunch of young men spending money they don't have. Pip feels guilty but also can't stop flexing. Herbert's also living beyond his means, partly due to Pip's influence. Meanwhile, Mr. Jaggers is stoic, reminding them both that they'll have an ongoing allowance until the benefactor says otherwise. Pip occasionally visits Jaggers's clerk, Wemmick, a quirky guy who's all business at work but transforms into a warm, friendly dude at home in his miniature castle, complete with a moat and an old father he calls the Aged P. Wemmick's motto is office, home is home, two separate worlds. Pip finds this bizarre but also enlightening. Every so often, Pip visits Miss Havisham, hoping for Estella updates. He learns Estella's back from abroad, grown into a radiant, icy cool woman who flirts with men but seems incapable of genuine affection. Pip's smitten all over again, convinced Miss Havisham is setting them up. Estella, for her part, warns him, "I have no heart." But Pip's like, she's just saying that. He fails to see the neon signs that she's basically emotionally unavailable. So, on the outside, Pip's living the dream. Fancy address, gentlemen's clubs, parties. On the inside, he's feeling uneasy about the mountain of debt, uncertain about his benefactor, and confused by Estella's behavior. He's also drifting away from his old friend Joe, who visits once and feels super awkward in Pip's posh environment. Pip's so mortified by Joe's lack of refinement that he can't even show basic kindness. That shame will come back to bite him. Part 5. Estella's Games, Miss Havisham's strange approval, and a shocking return. Estella lands in London, and Pip's starstruck to have her around. She's staying with a wealthy society lady, meeting suitors, attending balls. Miss Havisham urges her to break men's hearts, fueling Pip's hope that eventually he'll be the chosen one. But Estella's got a line of admirers, including the arrogant Bentley Drummle, a pompous jerk from Pip's gentlemen's club. Pip loathes Drummle, but Estella teasingly gives Drummle attention, which drives Pip nuts. One day, Estella bluntly tells Pip, "Don't blame me if I toy with other men. I never deceived you about my nature." Pip's conflicted. He wants to believe Miss Havisham groomed Estella just for him, but all signs point to a big heartbreak. Meanwhile, Miss Havisham starts acting oddly, sometimes clinging to Estella in a weird, possessive way, sometimes praising Pip for how far he's come. Pip's more confused than ever. As if Pip's love life weren't chaotic enough, an unexpected figure appears in London. The convict from Pip's childhood, Abel Magwitch, the guy whose life Pip saved with stolen food and a file. Pip's freaked, thinking the guy's back for revenge. But Magwitch confesses a bombshell. He's Pip's secret benefactor, not Miss Havisham. He made a fortune in Australia after being exiled and has funneled his earnings to Pip as a thank you for that childhood kindness. Pip's entire worldview shatters. His fancy lifestyle was financed by a convict, not by the sophisticated Miss Havisham. That means Estella was never destined for him. He was never part of Miss Havisham's master plan. Worse, associating with a returned convict is dangerous. Magwitch could be hanged if caught in England. Pip's horrified, both for his own social standing and for Magwitch's life. He's also ashamed of how he's treated Joe and Biddy, realizing he's no better than a stuck-up snob. Magwitch, on the other hand, is overjoyed to see Pip all grown up, proud of how he's become a gentleman. Pip can barely fake a smile, feeling guilty that he's not grateful. He's also paranoid that Magwitch's old enemies like Compayson, the man who jilted Miss Havisham, are lurking. Indeed, the city feels full of spies, and Pip senses an impending doom. Part 6. Pip's moral crisis. Loyalty versus reputation. Shell-shocked by the big reveal, Pip turns to Herbert for help. He confesses everything about Magwitch's identity. Herbert, ever the true friend, vows secrecy and helps Pip figure out what to do. They decide the best move is to smuggle Magwitch out of England, back to somewhere he won't be executed. But they need a plan and funds. Pip is low on cash, drowning in debt. Meanwhile, Pip visits Miss Havisham to confront her about the deception. She calmly admits, "I never said I was your benefactor. You just assumed. I wanted Estella to practice on you, yes, but only because I hated men after my heartbreak. I wanted revenge. However, I see now that I've gone too far." She begs Pip's forgiveness, looking pitiful in her dusty wedding dress. Pip, heartbroken, is like, "Sure, I forgive you." But he's also in pieces over Estella's apparent plan to marry Drummle. Miss Havisham begs Pip to show compassion to her. Estella's aloof as always, telling Pip she's marrying Drummle because, frankly, she can't love anyone. Pip tries to talk her out of it. He's a jerk. But she's stubborn. Miss Havisham's despair grows, realizing she's raised Estella to be heartless, and now it's backfiring. Back in London, Pip attempts to handle his debts and arrange for Magwitch's escape. He refuses further allowance from Magwitch, feeling guilty. Instead, he relies on Herbert's modest salary from a new merchant job, which Pip helped him get, ironically, with Magwitch's money. Tensions escalate. Orlick reappears, creeping around, possibly allied with Compeyson. Pip nearly gets ambushed one night in a marshy area. He's saved at the last second. To top it off, tragedy strikes at Satis' house. Miss Havisham sets herself on fire, accidentally or maybe subconsciously, by standing too close to the fireplace in her rotting wedding dress. Pip rushes to save her, but she's severely burned, eventually dying from her injuries. She begs again for forgiveness. Pip's devastated by the chaos she and he have both endured. Her fortune remains, but none of it's for Pip. She leaves sums to the pockets and other relatives. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking for Magwitch's survival. Pip and Herbert scramble to orchestrate a stealthy boat escape down the Thames. Part 7. The Escape Attempt, Compayson's Plot, and Magwitch's Fate. Pip, Herbert, and a trusted friend named Startop hatch a plan. They'll row Magwitch down the river to a steamer heading abroad. They slip out of London under cover of darkness, Magwitch disguised as a river boatman. Tensions run high. If they're caught, it's game over for Magwitch. On the final leg, they stop at an inn, thinking they're safe. Suddenly, Pip spots suspicious men lurking about. They row frantically toward the steamer. But as they near it, they're intercepted by a boat of river police, and with them is Compeyson, the same conman who once jilted Miss Havisham and was also Magwitch's old crime partner/enemy. Compeyson tipped off the cops, hoping to see Magwitch nabbed. Magwitch, furious at Compayson's betrayal, grapples with him in the water. The two vanish beneath the waves. Compayson's body eventually surfaces downstream, dead. Magwitch emerges badly injured, arrested by the authorities. Pip is devastated, but he stays loyal. Magwitch is the closest thing he has to a father figure now. Magwitch's injuries are severe. He's sent to jail, awaiting trial for returning to England illegally. Pip visits him daily, using what little money he has left to make Magwitch comfortable. Herbert leaves for a business opportunity overseas, offering Pip a position in his firm, but Pip can't abandon Magwitch. In the end, Magwitch is found guilty and sentenced to death. Pip holds his hand on his deathbed, revealing Estella is alive and well, though he doesn't mention she's engaged or married. Right before Magwitch passes, Pip whispers, "Your daughter's real name is Estella. She's grown into a lady. I'm sure she's beautiful." This brings Magwitch some peace. Right after Magwitch dies, the crown seizes his fortune, meaning Pip gets nothing. He's bankrupt, owes tons in debt, and nearly collapses from stress. But his moral compass has finally awakened. He stood by Magwitch, refusing to be the shallow social climber he once was. That's growth, people. Part 8. Rock bottom, reconciliation, and a glimmer of hope. With Magwitch gone and the inheritance confiscated, Pip hits rock bottom. Debt collectors hound him. He falls ill, stuck in his London apartment, delirious with fever. He's ready to give up. Then, like a guardian angel, Joe Gargery appears. Joe's been secretly nursing Pip back to health, covering his debts as best he can. Remember that blacksmith Pip snubbed? Turns out Joe is the real MVP. He never stopped caring about Pip. When Pip regains his senses, he's overwhelmed by Joe's kindness, realizing how awful he's been. He tries to apologize, but Joe shrugs it off, calling Pip old chap like old times. Once Pip recovers, Joe quietly leaves, thinking Pip might not want a blacksmith hanging around. Pip dashes after him too late, wanting to thank him properly. But Joe's gone back to the forge. Determined to make amends, Pip heads home to the marshes. Mrs. Joe passed away some time ago, so now it's just Joe and Biddy, who run a small school. Pip arrives on the day of Joe and Biddy's wedding. Yes, they married each other. Pip's surprised but genuinely happy for them. He confesses all his regrets, apologizes for his snobbery, and vows to turn over a new leaf. Biddy, who's always been wise, advises Pip to seek his own honest path. With nothing left in Kent, Pip decides to accept Herbert's offer overseas. He joins Herbert at Clarker's as a clerk, then partner, working in the mercantile trade. For 11 years, Pip toils abroad, learning humility and industry. He gradually pays Joe back, secretly, so as not to embarrass him, maintains correspondence with Biddy, and matures into a responsible man. But what of Estella? Well, rumor has it her marriage to Drummle was awful. Drummle turned out to be an abusive jerk. No surprise. Eventually, Drummle dies, some say in a horse-related accident. Estella's widowed, presumably wealthy. Pip never quite stops wondering about her. After all, she was his first and arguably only love, though unrequited. Part 9. The Endings and the Legacy of Expectations. In Dickens's original published version, Pip eventually returns to England for a visit. He crosses paths with Estella at the old, crumbling site of Satis House, which is about to be demolished. Estella has changed, no longer the proud, icy girl. She's been softened by suffering, genuinely remorseful for past cruelties. Pip, older and wiser, greets her as a friend. They chat about old memories. Estella says she understands what the heart means now. Dickens gives a hint they might remain friends, or possibly more. The last line famously suggests they walk out of the ruins hand in hand, implying a hopeful, if ambiguous, future. However, Dickens originally wrote a bleaker ending where Estella remarried a doctor, and she and Pip just had a polite conversation, going their separate ways. Under pressure from friends and publishers, Dickens revised it to the more optimistic version. Regardless of which ending you prefer, the big takeaway is that Pip learns humility and empathy. He started as a naive boy dazzled by wealth and upper-class life, ignoring the genuine love from Joe and Biddy. Magwitch symbolizes that redemption can come from unexpected places, and you can't judge someone solely by their criminal past. Miss Havisham exemplifies how revenge and bitterness can consume a life, warping Estella into an emotional weapon. Estella's journey is about overcoming that manipulation and learning to feel. By the end, Pip finds moral redemption. Joe remains the world's nicest blacksmith. Biddy spreads goodness, and Estella is free from her toxic marriage, hopefully with a shot at real love or at least personal growth. The novel's title, Great Expectations, is a double-edged sword. Sometimes our ambitions blind us to what truly matters, like loyalty, compassion, and the family we take for granted. So that's your modern dorm lounge retelling of Great Expectations, a swirl of convict revelations, heartbreak, haunted wedding dresses, shocking tragedies, and second chances. Dickens reminds us that while fortune and social standing can vanish in an instant, decency and love last forever, especially if you have a kind blacksmith in your corner. Wow, you conquered Dickens' classic like a total story-slaying superstar. Pip and Estella have nothing on your determination. High five time. Next up, fifth and the last book of Level 1, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Get ready for a trip into a zany world where logic takes a vacation, cats grin, queens rage, and nothing is as it seems. Wonderland's calling. Don't be late. Also, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and ring the bell to stay in the loop for all our epic content. And guess what? A new fun retelling audiobook drops every single weekday.